Thank you, sir, for your time. It's a pleasure having you in المجلة.
Thank you. Thank you for your invitation.
So, nearly a month now after the US-Israeli war with Iran, some would argue that Europe has been largely a spectator to this conflict. Um, even several European leaders, including the closest ally to the US, Sir Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, said that his country and Europe was not consulted in this war by Mr. Trump. So, do you think that Europe is largely a spectator to this
Uh,
conflict?
un- Unfortunately, I think that indeed, as we speak, Europe is mainly a spectator, and that's really regrettable because you're absolutely right that the United States and Israel they decided to launch this military intervention without any prior consultation with the European members and the European countries. And on the other hand, we all face the consequences, including in Europe, of the decision made by Israel and by the United States. But my first comment is related to the region and to the neighbors, especially the Gulf countries, the Arab countries, because in those countries today they suffer the consequences of what is going on, and what Iran is doing by attacking its neighbor, including during the Ramadan period, is something which is really shocking. But on the other hand, I think we need more political coordination. And on the EU side, you know that we would like to express more support, more solidarity with the countries in the neighborhood, with the countries in the region. I was the one a certain time ago who decided to advocate a lot for closer ties between the Gulf countries and the European Union. And when our partners are suffering, are in difficulties, that's our duty within the EU to assist, to support, not only with words, but with concrete action. And I advocate for more resolve in the way at the EU's level we address the current geopolitical situation.
Yeah, I mean, the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Kuwait, Oman, I mean, Bahrain, of course, I mean, all of them have found themselves in the middle of this war. And of course, they are dealing with it as much as they can economically and militarily as well as self-defense. But what kind of strategy the EU have or has actually towards the Gulf states? So is there any strategic partnership
Yeah,
given the current geopolitical tensions?
Yeah, I am absolutely convinced that the European Union, if we want to be taken seriously, we have to demonstrate today, now, that we are a reliable partner. And that's why it's time for close diplomatic ties and political ties with those countries so that we can understand very well what we can do to be effective in the support we can bring to those countries and to our partners in that region. That's my first point. But my second point is the following. You know, in those circumstances, a serious problem, in my view, is the fact that we don't know what are the military goals or the political goals of Israel and of the United States. That's a very strange situation. And of course, based on the international law, there is no justification for this military intervention. At the same time, there is no doubt that on our side we condemn this Iranian regime because we know that for decades this Iranian regime oppressed its own people, but at the same time is spreading hatred all across the region, is exporting terrorists all across the region, and is a constant threat for global security. But we think that in those circumstances, it's very important to be active, to be involved in diplomatic efforts, in close political coordination with our allies in the region, with our partners, with our friends, with our brothers in that region, And that's, I think, what the EU leadership must do now, without waiting. I think that that region is expecting the EU not to be a spectator. Unfortunately, there's a situation today, but to be a player, to be an actor, to try to have more influence. And you are absolutely right that this is a military war, but there's also an economic war, because we can see that the idea is to target the economic resources in the region to be painful against those countries in that region.
To me, it seems you mentioned the international law, and to me, it seems a bit paradoxical in terms of what? In terms of the EU strongly opposed the Russian invasion of Ukraine because it was not authorized by an international law. But now we have the United States and Israel are launching this war unilaterally without consulting their closest or close allies, but also without an international law. How do you assess this paradox?
No, you're absolutely right that in my view, it's very important to avoid any kind of double standards. If we support international law, we should support international law always and everywhere. And I think that some of the Europeans made huge mistake when they were not able to express a clear voice with regard to the military intervention in Gaza, for instance. And in my view, there was clearly a practice of double standards, and it's not acceptable. Even if this, at the same time, because the EU was divided, there were also many European voices being very clear about this. That's my first point. My second point, of course, Iran and Ukraine, that's not comparable. Ukraine is a democratic country. Iran is today run by a dictatorship, by an oppressor. But having said that, I repeat what I said just before. This military intervention is not compliant with the international law. And I think it's important to be clear about that. Israel and the United States, without any prior consultation, decided to launch this military intervention. I'm not certain they have exactly the same goals, Israel and the United States. We will see in the days to come, in the weeks to come, if there is a constant coordination from a political point of view between Israel and the United States. And I want to be very clear. When the security of Israel is at stake, when the existence of Israel is at stake, the European countries will always be supportive for Israel and its right to exist and its right to have its security guaranteed. But if the purpose is to develop a certain ideology around Great Israel without respect for the sovereignty of the countries in the region, that's another story. And I think that in the current context, that's very important for the European leadership to be clear about that and to avoid any kind of ambiguities and misunderstandings. But let me tell you, if I'm very honest, that what is going on today in that region is one more indication of what I said before. The transatlantic relationship, these historic ties between the United States and the EU is over. That's over, at least as we used to know this relationship over the last decades. And something new will have to be written between the United States and the EU, because you can see that the list of the differences between the EU and the United States is getting longer and longer in the Middle East, in Ukraine, and with regard to the way the United States is ambiguous towards Russia, but including with regard to the American position in relationship with Greenland, for instance.
You mentioned a very interesting angle, actually, in our conversation now about what's being advocated in Israel, which is the idea of the far right Greater Israel. Can you elaborate on this in terms of who has the authority, actually, the political authority to advocate for such far right extremist ideas?
I think that's very concerning that what was seen until a certain time as an extreme position defended by an extreme political party. It seems to become the new normal in some circles, and that's extremely concerning. And I made a link with your previous question because, in fact, I think that in the current geopolitical context, we can see that there is a kind of a rupture, and we can see that the rules-based order, which was not perfect, but which allowed a certain predictability, a certain stability. We can see that this traditional rules-based order is over, and you can see temptations by some, including in the United States, to make a choice in direction of unilateralism, protectionism, a certain imperialist approach, to be clear. And in this context, it's very important to make a choice. And on my side, I think that despite the pressure, including in the Middle East, we have to stick to the principles, and we have to defend the idea that we need a rules-based order. And if we defend the rules-based order, first, we cannot accept the illegal settlements made by Israel. That's my first point. I'm very concerned about the current situation, including in the West Bank, including in Gaza. I'm also observing that Israel is countering Hezbollah in Lebanon. And when this over, Israel's security, we can support some efforts to counter the threats posed by Hezbollah. But if the purpose in Syria, in Lebanon, in other countries in the region is to develop this ideology of Great Israel, then I think that's a challenge for all of us in the region, for the neighborhood, for sure, but also for us in Europe. And if we are friends with Israel, and we are friends with Israel, we have to be sincere with Israel and with the authorities of Israel. We can tell them, and we have to tell them, look, when that's about your security and your right to exist, we are on your side 1000%. But if the idea is to get in direction of this ideology of Great Israel, which could lead to more instability and more challenges and more difficulties in the neighborhood, then we have to be clear and not to be ambiguous. And we have, I think, to dare to say what we think.
It's very interesting, Sarah, and it seems that this far-right political vision or ideology, and I would say it's a political, and as the far-right wing in Israel might interpret it from a biblical or religious perspective, but this ideology might also lead to endless wars. Do you agree to this?
Look, my point is very simple. I think we need to be wise. We need to be reasonable. We need to make a choice for rationality. If everyone we have an extreme position, then there is no doubt that it will be an endless war, an endless instability, and it will be terrible for all of us. And I'm thinking in particular to the youth in that region, because they will suffer for decades the consequences of what is going on. On the contrary, I think that because there are, again, those difficult circumstances, it could be, in my view, it must be opportunities to try to fix the old problems. And to be clear, I think a two-state solution is the only serious solution. That's my first point. My second point, we have to stick more to the international law. And when even in the EU there are voices ambiguous with regard to this question of the international law, all of us, we are losing. And that's why within the EU, I'm one of those voices advocating very strongly in favor of more consistency. A crime is a crime. In Ukraine, in Gaza, in the Middle East, all across the world, a crime is a crime. And if we consider that depending on the geography, or depending on the circumstances, or depending on who is the author of a crime, we have a different answer, then we lose our credibility. You know, the European Union is a very special political project. Why? Because this project was built on the ashes of two world wars. And we made a choice for coordination. We made a choice for cooperation based on a very simple idea. If we connect, if we cooperate, it means that we share risk. And when we share risk, we share interest. First idea. And second idea, we think that a deal is a good deal when this is a win-win deal. Today, we have the impression that for some countries, for some political personalities at the international level, a good deal is a deal with a loser and with a winner, with the winner tempted to humiliate the loser. I think it cannot work. I think that in the short term, it can give an illusion to security, an illusion of maybe satisfaction. But in the midterm, very fast, we can see that it will lead to frustrations, it will lead to imbalances. And when there are imbalances, when there are frustrations, sooner or later, you have again a dispute, you have again a conflict. That's how I'm looking at the current situation.
The Strait of Hormuz is now making the headlines. Everybody's now talking about the energy supplies. One-fifth of the world's energy supplies going through the Strait of Hormuz, this very narrow natural waterway. Does the EU and Europe have a concrete plan to protect the international trade if this Strait of Hormuz or waterway remains effectively closed by the Iranian missiles and threats?
Look, first, an observation. For me, with my geopolitical experience, it's very difficult to understand how it is possible that Israel and the United States were not aware that by launching this military intervention very fast, very quickly, we would face such a situation with the economic consequences for the Gulf region, but also at the international level, at the global level. That's my first comment. My second comment, I think that we have to coordinate with the Gulf countries, with our partners, to identify what kind of offer can be done. And here again, de-escalation and diplomatic approach will be needed more than ever. I don't see how it could be possible to fix this issue without having a certain level of political dialogue, of political coordination. And no, in that region, there are countries involved in mediation with a great experience in the field of mediation. You know that Oman was playing a very effective role in recent months, trying to help the United States and the stakeholders in the region, including in Iran, to develop a better understanding. And even if I'm not naive about the nature of this Iranian regime, not at all. And you understood my point about this regime. On the other hand, I can see what are the direct consequences today. I can see that today there are a winner, Russia, because thanks to the situation, it puts Russia in a stronger position, which is not a good news for the EU and for Ukraine, point one. And I can see that there is a certain resilience of this Iranian regime, and they are in a position to blackmail the rest of the world, and including their partners in the region, by using this blockade of the Hormuz Strait. And even if we find some ways to unblock partially or in total this Hormuz Strait, we also know that there will be some challenges with the private companies, with the insurance and reinsurance companies. I think that we'll face some difficulties in the weeks to come, but indeed, we have no choice. We have to address it. We have to use our various channels of political dialogue and mediation to see what can be done as soon as possible.
It's very interesting that President Zelensky of Ukraine offered the Gulf states Ukraine's counter-drone expertise. What kind of military strategy or offer, actually, I would ask, the EU, you think, from your political experience, of course, I know that you're not speaking for the EU, but what kind of military offer or strategy
Look,
realistically the EU can offer to the Gulf states now, 4 weeks into this war?
I'll be very concrete and very operational, because I think that our friends in the Gulf countries, they don't need words. They need concrete assistance and concrete support. We, on the EU side, we have a very strong collaboration in the field of defense with Ukraine. And Ukraine, and including the Ukraine defense industry, because of the war in Ukraine, they've developed very, very fast a very good technology in the field of drone, including defensive drones, which is a challenge in Ukraine, as you may know. And that's why if I was today in an official position, I would try to coordinate with all my European member states and Ukraine to put at the disposal of the Gulf countries more military capabilities in the field of defensive drone to help them to protect themselves against those unfair attacks launched by Iran to target their infrastructure, but also with civilian consequences in those countries. That's very concrete. That's very operational. I also commend this decision made by Volodymyr Zelensky, because it is showing that Volodymyr Zelensky understands very well that those conflicts and those wars are interconnected, and it understands very well that it's important to show the readiness to support with military assistance the Gulf countries, including with defensive drone. And I mentioned defensive drone. Why? Because the European Union, I think, don't want to get involved in a war with Iran, but we want to support and to help the countries that are attacked by Iran, and we would like them to be better protected. And I think that good partners have the responsibility to demonstrate that they are good partners, not only by having sometimes a summit, by issuing together nice statements. They have to demonstrate that they are reliable partners by providing concrete support.
My last question, sir, is about Mr. Trump's um, uh, controversial, or what's the U.S. even describes as so-called 15-point plan to end this war with Iran. Any comment on this plan in particular by Mr. Trump?
Look, I sincerely hope that this war will end as soon as possible. This is what I hope. And I regret once again that we don't know what are the military goals or the political purpose. Is the idea to get the fall of the regime? Yes or no? That's unclear to me based on what is going on. That's my first point. And my second point, I think what is going on in the United States is something that we have to take into account. And that's the reason why for many years I'm a strong advocate of what I call the European strategic autonomy. I think that because of the power of the single market, because of the power of the 27 European governments, we should have more ambition in terms of resilience and in terms of influence. And I think that the destiny of the EU is not to be a vassal of anyone. And I think that if the United States wants to develop a good partnership, a good alliance with the EU, we need something where there is more mutual respect. We are, on the EU side, a respected and respectful partner, but we must be respected. And today, I have not always the impression that we are not respected. But when you imagine that such a military intervention is launched, is started without any coordination with the European countries, it shows something. And I think that we have to face the reality. Maybe we don't like this reality, but we have to assume that there are consequences. And if we want the EU tomorrow to be a stronger actor with a clear vision, we need to prepare ourselves for a world that probably will be different tomorrow if I compare with yesterday.
And lastly, we talked a lot about Israel and the United States. How about Iran itself when it comes to its counter proposal to Mr. Trump's 15-point plan? Also, I mean, the Iranian state media circulating that this is impossible, that he has not negotiated with anyone. And they even came up this morning or last night before conducting this interview with you with a counter proposal, which seems to both sides actually or actually the multiple sides now, Pakistan, Egypt, and other parties behind the scenes might be negotiating. It seems that impossible to bridge the gap between the warring sides.
Yeah, Look. I don't intend to speculate on a process that maybe is going on, maybe not. But I suppose, based on my experience, that there are back channels, and that in that region there are actors, there are countries, and there are back channels. But I'm not certain that today, in the current circumstances, there is a high level of trust regarding the United States and regarding the American negotiators. And I suppose, based on my experience, when we face such a difficult situation, rebuilding trust is important, but it's also very difficult. It takes time. And in particular, I'm thinking about the countries in that region, because based on my knowledge, many of the countries in that region, they were also taken by surprise. And many of them, just like the EU, they were not part of this decision prior to the start of this military intervention.
Charles Michel, the former president of the European Council from 2019 to 24, and the former Belgium's prime minister, I have to say the youngest Belgium's prime minister. Thank you so much indeed for your time. It's a pleasure, sir, having you in المجلة.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.